I get so many great dog training questions in my comments, and I started wishing that I could share them so that they could help everyone. And then I realized this morning, why don't I? It's a cold, snowy day today, so I just want to hibernate inside with a coffee. So I thought I would sit down, have a coffee with you, and answer 3 of the most interesting questions that I've gotten this week. So I just want to mention that as I was editing this, I noticed I put the coffee on the couch next to me, which is a new thing I've been doing for whatever reason. My husband hates it. I want to joke that I used to get my adrenaline from rock climbing, and now that I have a baby, I get my adrenaline from dangerously putting coffee on my couch. So if it stressed you out, I am sorry. I didn't mean to. It doesn't stay there very long, but just letting you know, let's move on. Question 1. How do you train hiking on a long leash and allow freedom and enjoyment for the dog without having them get far ahead of you and pull? Our dog stays on the trail and does not venture out to the sides, but he walks faster than us and reaches the end of his leash quite easily. We have trained the word check, where he stops and waits a few seconds for us to catch up, but he soon reaches the end of the leash again. We can't have him check 100 times during a 30-minute hike. What do you suggest? So first I want to say that I absolutely love hiking with my dog, and it's something that I've been doing for about a decade now. However, in my province, there's pretty strict leash laws, and they do fine you if you don't use a leash, so quite commonly I will use a long line on hikes, so this is something that I personally do a lot of. So my first thought is that the commenter didn't specify how their dog's leash skills are on regular walks. I'm going to assume, since they didn't mention it, that they're pretty decent, but if not, I would start there. Anytime we can get our dog used to walking without leash tension, it makes them more sensitive when they do feel it, so it's going to help the whole process. And the second thing is that I love long lines and I encourage using them. However, if a dog isn't used to having that much freedom, it can make them forget that the human is on the other end of the leash. I'll have more tips for building engagement on walks in the next couple points, but first I just want to say that if your dog is never used to having that much freedom, I would introduce it incrementally. So if you're used to a 6-foot leash on normal walks, I wouldn't jump to a 30-foot line right away. I'd meet somewhere in the middle. One of the easiest ways to do this is to tie a loop in the middle of your long line. This helps keep them closer for training and for cueing. Once they master that length, then give them more freedom. Next, in terms of building engagement on walks, one of my favorite ways to do that is to reward voluntary check-ins. You'll hear me say this in many of my dog training videos, but I think that we should be rewarding the behaviors we want to see more of rather than waiting for a dog to make a mistake. If your dog checks in with you frequently on walks, they're less likely to pull in general, so if you reward to the point where you feel a little bit crazy, you're going to notice a massive difference. My next and probably most important suggestion is to add this simple recall game, which I'll link a video for here and in the comments. It's very simple but very effective, and I think everybody should play it with their dog. It teaches your dog to come back to you without any cueing, even after some distractions, so it's really helpful for all leash skills. And lastly, if your dog does pull, I think you should use a training method that allows you to intervene while still rewarding the behavior that you want, which is walking without leash tension. I have a few different methods that I typically suggest, but I'm going to assume that since they're out on a hike, they don't want to use a few where they go back and forth, so this is the one that I would suggest using. The second technique is when your dog pulls, call them back to you and then toss a treat reward on the ground behind you. Start walking again in the original direction as soon as your dog has eaten that treat, and then reward them again when they reach your side. Question 2. My dog's issue isn't pulling when he walks, it's that he'll often stop and refuse to walk. I try calling and encouraging him, but he won't budge. Any tips? So this is actually a pretty common issue and one that I want to make a full tutorial for, but I thought it'd be worth answering here as well. Before we talk about any possible training, I think there's 2 things that are worth ruling out first. The first is pain, just to make sure that your dog doesn't have anything that's causing discomfort, and that's why they don't want to keep walking. And 2 is to consider where you're trying to take them. Make sure that you're not trying to take them somewhere that they don't want to go, such as a busy road if you have a really sound sensitive dog. Assuming that neither of those are issues, we again have to think about how to reward the behavior that we want, which is the dog walking instead of stopping. If we spend a lot of time encouraging and praising the dog, trying to get them to move once they've stalled, you can accidentally be rewarding that behavior. Instead, I would suggest trying this. Put a treat between your fingers and make sure that your dog sees it. Walk to the very end of the leash and turn your back to your dog. Have the treat at a height where your dog can see it. We're going to use this as a treat lure. Wait for your dog to start moving towards you. The first time that you do this, you might be waiting a while, but it should get faster and faster. Once your dog almost catches up to you, then slowly start walking, which allows you to reward your dog in motion, which again is what we want them to be doing. It's also really important to phase out the treat lure and disconnect it from the dog thinking it has anything to do with stalling by slowly increasing the amount of time that you expect them to walk next to you before they get that reward. And then lastly, make sure that you're heavily rewarding your dog when they're walking with you, because ultimately that's the behavior that you want them to do. And question 3. So this last comment actually came from a troll.
My being a troll is not related to my online trolling.
That left a bunch of other nasty comments and got himself blocked, but I thought this particular one was worth addressing here. What if my dog sometimes ignores food? Should I always have birthday cake in my backpack in case any other food is not good enough to get his attention?
So more importantly, do you want cake or not?
My knee-jerk response to this was that I wanted to say that dogs prefer meat over birthday cake, hope that helps, but I'll give you a less sarcastic answer. You're probably going to sense a common theme in this video, but for positive reinforcement to work, we have to reward the behaviors that we want. If you're trying to use treats as bribes to elicit certain behaviors, then you're not actually training correctly. That's why even with lure training, you'll always hear how important it is to phase out that lure and put the behavior on a cue instead. With leash training, one of the most common mistakes that I see is that people put their dog in a situation way above their skill level, and then they hope the treats are going to make the dog behave. When this fails, they claim that positive reinforcement... Somebody at my door? Give me 1 second. The timing of which sentence I was in the middle of was pretty ironic because Nira is typically one of the most sound-sensitive dogs that I've ever met. I just want to point out how calm she stayed with that knock on the door when typically this was her response even if she knew it was me knocking. I just want to point out that Nira's reaction in that clip proves that positive reinforcement works even for difficult behaviors like window reactivity. When this fails, they'll claim that positive reinforcement doesn't work, but that's not true. It's that the trainer didn't set up the training properly, not that the method doesn't work. The analogy that I often give is that you can't expect university level results from your dog if you've only put them through kindergarten level training. If your dog isn't responsive to treats, you've likely increased the difficulty too quickly and/or they're over threshold. I have a video on my channel that explains threshold, and I personally think it should be the most popular one on my channel because it's one of those concepts that if you understand it, it changes everything about your training. I'll link it here. It really helps you understand why your dog isn't responsive to treats in certain scenarios. I have a leash training playlist on my channel that will cover specific tips for a lot of training concerns, but until the difficulty level is chosen appropriately and threshold is managed, you will struggle. Let me know in the comments if you found this Q&A video helpful and if it's a style that you would like to see again. Happy training! I'll see you in the next video. Do you have anything to say? Emma, do you have anything to say? Oh. She tells a lot of stories that aren't true.